Actinogen is an ASX-listed biotech company that licensed in a series of compounds, a family of compounds, from Edinburgh University about 4 years ago. This family of compounds are 11-beta-HSD1 inhibitors, an enzyme that specifically activates cortisol. Now, what sets our drugs apart is that they're brain penetrant. So we're targeting the 11-beta-HSD1 enzyme in the brain. Our company has continued the development of the series of drugs, but really the lead drug is Zannamem, and that's the drug we've taken forward into clinical development. So Zannamem targets the 11-beta-HSD1 enzyme. The enzyme is present throughout the body. We're specifically designed to target the enzyme in the brain. Our drug gets across the blood-brain barrier. The enzyme is specifically concentrated in the hippocampus and frontal cortex, the areas most impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And what's been recognized is that chronically elevated cortisol, persistently raised cortisol in an aging population is associated with the development and the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And this is the way we're targeting the treatment of the disease going forward. Now, there's some 100 different compounds under development for Alzheimer's disease currently, and this reflects the complexity of the disease and the multifactorial nature of the disease. The majority of the drugs under development are targeting abnormal protein buildup, the beta amyloid protein buildup in the brain. That's one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. Another abnormal protein is the tau protein, and this is where there's been a huge investment in trying to prevent or clear these proteins from the brain. Unfortunately, this hasn't been particularly successful, and the research community now recognizes we need to look beyond the more traditional, the more mainstream approaches to Alzheimer's. And this is what Xanamem reflects, a novel approach to treating a disease where we've got clear evidence to show that chronically raised cortisol is associated with Alzheimer's disease. We want to demonstrate by inhibiting cortisol production in the brain, we can improve, moderate, treat Alzheimer's disease. What's been recognized over some decades now is that raised cortisol, persistently raised cortisol, chronically raised cortisol in an aging population is associated with cognitive impairment. This happens across a number of diseases associated with raised cortisol. So it clearly happens in Alzheimer's disease, but in depression, schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, a number of neurodegenerative conditions have raised cortisol and have concomitant cognitive impairment. What's particularly been recognized in recent times is the association between raised cortisol and Alzheimer's disease. And this has been demonstrated across a raft of epidemiological studies and further endorsed by animal studies that have been done in animal models of Alzheimer's disease. Probably one of the more compelling recent studies is an Australian study done by the ABLE Consortium, where they've followed a prospective population of healthy, elderly Australians over some 10 years now and produced numerous, nearly 200 peer-reviewed publications. The one recent publication looked at cortisol and demonstrated that in an elderly population with raised cortisol who are cognitively normal, there was a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. This study concluded by indicating that we had to find ways of inhibiting cortisol to prevent Alzheimer's disease going forward. But this is just one of the studies that demonstrate the same pattern, that chronically raised cortisol is associated with cognitive impairment in an aging population and the development and progression of Alzheimer's disease. Another intriguing study published just in the last 6 months in neurology was a study that looked at a cohort in the Framingham study group in Massachusetts, where they showed that over an 8-year period in actually a younger age group, that there was a clear structural impact in patients with a raised cortisol. You could see that on MRIs. So clearly, this chronically raised cortisol is toxic to the brain, is impacting the brain. And this is demonstrated both structurally on MRIs. It can be demonstrated by looking at hippocampal volumes. The hippocampus is the part of the brain most associated with recent memories, which is obviously clearly part of the early symptomatology of Alzheimer's disease. So again and again and again, these studies reinforce the principle that chronically raised cortisol is associated with cognitive impairment and the development and progression of Alzheimer's disease. And we are hoping that our drug, we know our drug will impact the cortisol in the brain. We're hoping that that will demonstrate a clinical benefit in Alzheimer's patients. XanADu is our major phase II trial in Alzheimer's disease. We initiated it in mid-2017 and in fact have just finished enrolling patients, and we're expecting the study to read out results within 4 months from now. So by June this year, we will have the results from that trial. A very rapid trial, so 2 years from beginning to end, but that reflects the speed of response that we expect from our drug. Our animal data and previous human studies have demonstrated that cortisol inhibition in a susceptible population will produce a response within 4 to 6 weeks. So our study was a 12-week treatment period, and that reflects the speed at which we've been able to run the trial. 186 patients across 25 sites in the USA, Australia, and the UK. Very similar health systems, very similar language groups to decrease the confounders that are presented by language and culture across other population groups. The study's gone incredibly well. We finished on time, on target, and we look forward to announcing the results within the next 4 months. XanADu is reading out in May, June this year. Clearly, everybody is waiting for the results, the company, the research community, and of course, patients as well. It's a phase II trial. XanADu is a phase II trial. So the results from that trial will inform the way forward, the development into phase III, into additional phase II studies. So there are a number of ways we can go. Concurrent with the XanADu trial, though, we have a number of other studies up and running, which equally a number of them are going to read out at the same time period, May, June this year. And all of that data together will be very valuable in informing the way forward for our development in Alzheimer's disease. But additionally, we've got a number of other indications that we're looking at. The mechanism of action through the inhibition of 11-beta-HSD1 offers us opportunities to develop our drug in cognitive impairment, in depression, cognitive impairment in schizophrenia, and a number of other conditions. So we're looking at those opportunities as well. All of that data is going to inform the way forward, and we're looking forward to being able to announce in the second half of this year exactly what our plans are and how we're going to continue the development of this very exciting compound.